Welcome to another episode of the Decatur Dish. I am your host, editor, and publisher, Dan Whisenhunt. We have an exciting episode for you today. I have brought with me the sage of Pine Lake, Georgia journalist, George Chidi. George, how are you, sir?
I'm good, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Decatur Dish is a program we do with our media partners in Atlanta News First every Tuesday at 12:30 on ANF+. We hope you'll tune in for more exciting interviews like the one we're about to do right now. George, how are you, sir?
I'm good. It's been there are no slow news days.
There really
in
aren't.
Georgia.
What are you up to these days? I know you've recently started writing for The Guardian.
I have. So I am on a one-year contract to look at issues of democracy in the South for The Guardian. And The Guardian is a large British publication. You see them a lot on social media. Still running for the Atlanta Objective. I'm finishing up a podcast about the YSL trial, the prosecution of Young Thug called King Slime.
And we're going to get to that on our show in just a little bit. First, we want to start with something really local, which is DeKalb County police staffing levels. George, you wrote about this, it might have been a year or two ago, but
Yeah.
something you've continued to follow. What do we know about DeKalb police staffing levels right now? What's going on, and what is the impact of that for our local community?
So let's start with this. Like, the DeKalb County Police Department does not like talking about its performance in general and its staffing problems in particular. I made a basic request just yesterday. Please tell me how many police officers you have on staff. And I am now going through their lengthy open records process because they don't want to just tell me. When I was looking at this 2 years ago, DeKalb had 600 police officers, give or take, on staff. Let me put this in perspective. Atlanta has about the same number of people that they police, and they have 1,500 officers. Other counties, other cities that have about 500,000 or 600,000 people in them tend to have 1,000 police officers or more when you look across the country. DeKalb's policing is short. And it's a real problem, I think. And normally I'd have a lot of equanimity about this. But DeKalb is setting homicide records. While the homicide rate is falling everywhere else in metro Atlanta, it's rising in DeKalb. And I think this is a contributing factor.
So what is the authorized force strength in DeKalb County? How many officers can we have?
So on paper, they can have about 900. Like, that's what's in the budget.
And what do you think the overall impact is at a local level? I mean, I could tell you what I've seen. I was a witness at a crash, a few months ago. I called 911. It took them an hour, I think. So I'd just take an hour and sit there and wait on the police to show up. That's just one example. You talked about the murder rate. What are some of the other impacts that people would see locally from having fewer police officers?
Well, some of it's sort of basic and fairly obvious. Traffic enforcement is minimal to non-existent. You're not going to get a speeding ticket if you blow through an intersection right now because the cops are too busy. On a given night, 100,000 people are being policed by any one of the precincts in DeKalb, and there might only be 10 officers, usually less than that, answering phone calls to 911. I think that some of the crime that was occurring in Atlanta during the pandemic has started to shift as they see this weakness in DeKalb. And I think that's driving some of the violence that we're looking at.
One of the things that's crime-related that does affect DeKalb police, I don't want to touch on briefly, is Decaturish reported that the DeKalb jail is now not taking defendants who have not been medically cleared. So they're not getting booked. They're not having booking photos done until they're medically cleared and brought back. What is the effect that that's going to have on policing in DeKalb County? Do you have a guess?
So let me start with this. The jails are troubled. We've heard a lot about the Fulton County Jail. DeKalb has had issues as well. Most jails have because of the internal staffing problems that the jails have. I think that police officers having to, like, what happens is a police officer goes to a crime, somebody's injured, they're trying to arrest the person, and suddenly that police officer is now out of circulation for some period of time at Grady or another medical facility, waiting for that person to be medically cleared. And it slows the process down. It effectively takes police officers off the street.
Let's switch gears a little bit, because you've done a lot of work on the Young Thug trial. I have to confess, I am very vaguely familiar with this. So if you could break this down for somebody who knows little or nothing about this trial, what is it, and why is it such a big deal?
So let me start with this. If you don't know about the Young Thug trial, don't feel bad. It's it's weird, and it started off fairly obscurely for me too. But Young Thug is a very big name rapper. Been on Saturday Night Live, sold millions of records, very popular. But he's also accused of being the leader of a street gang in Atlanta, and that a street gang that is accused of committing murders, among other things. In 2015, a gang war essentially broke out in the streets of Atlanta between YSL, that's the gang that Young Thug is accused of leading, and YFN. They're both factions of the Bloods gang in different parts of the city, and as many as 50 different shootings could be attributed to this street gang beef. So a couple of years ago, under Fonnie Willis, who was being really hardcore about prosecuting gang crime, finally decided to roll up both street gangs and first arrested members of YFN and then YSL and Young Thug. And it's turning into the longest criminal trial in the state's history. Jury selection took 8 months, and they had to go through 2,000 people because they knew that the trial would last at least 3 to 6 months. The actual trial began in November. It is now April, and I don't think we're halfway through. A lot of it is because were a lot of people who are being tried, and because there are 400 witnesses, and because there are 6 defense attorneys plus the prosecution who are taking a shot at all of those witnesses. This is going to last a long, long time.
What are they specifically charged with? Isn't it a RICO case?
It's a RICO case and a gang case. Young Thug, his real name is Jeffrey Williams, is charged with racketeering and also a gang charge. And what that means is they're accused, like this group, there are 28 people who were initially charged, many of whom have pled out. We're all charged with operating and running a street gang that engaged in violence, sold drugs. Young Thug himself is accused effectively of facilitating a murder of another accused street gang member named Donovan Thomas in 2015 by renting a car that was used in the drive-by to kill him.
What brought you into this case? Was it the size of it? Was it the characters? Was it all of the above? What attracted you to covering this case? And I do realize there's some significance because RICO is also, I believe, being used in the Trump case as well.
And the case is a very interesting window into how Fonnie Willis approaches RICO. I started looking at it because I was writing about criminal justice issues in Atlanta from a political perspective. What I wanted to understand was crime is rising. What are you doing about it? What is politically possible? What works and what doesn't? Fonnie Willis said street gangs are driving 80% of the violence on the street. And I was skeptical. So I started to look at gang cases. And one thing led to another, and it became clear that Young Thug was going to be arrested. So I wrote about that, and one thing leads to another, and here we are 2 years later, more than that.
And you've done some really great deep dive investigative reporting on that. Of course, George has a Substack called The Atlanta Objective. Highly recommend you read and support that. It's great journalism that you're not going to find anywhere else. Switching gears again, want to talk about some of the legislative races this year. A lot of our legislators are running with some pretty significantly different maps. What are the legislative races that you're paying attention to, and why?
So one that immediately jumps to mind, it's not in DeKalb. It's in North Fulton, and it's Ashwin Ramaswamy. He is relatively young. He's in his early 20s. He's a Georgia Tech grad, politically active, and a graduate of the local schools in North Fulton County. And he's challenging Sean Still, who's a state senator, very conservative, who is also one of the defendants in the Trump case. He's the only one who's elected to public office who has been charged in the Trump case. That district is the only close district in the state Senate in Georgia because of the state of gerrymandering in the state. It's the only one that a Democrat realistically has got a shot at picking up.
What are some of the other races that you're following as well? I know we talked briefly before the show about Sarah Draper and her race against, Becky Evans? And I guess they're both incumbents, and they both got drawn into the same district. What other races? Well, first of all, talk to me about that race, and talk to me about some of the other races that involve some of the heavily redrawn maps that are on the ballot this year.
So legislative lines were redrawn this year, and there was a court case over it, a battle, and the state legislature had to redraw the lines with the idea of increasing minority representation. But they did that largely by pairing off white legislators who were Democrats against one another. Now, Sarah Draper isn't white. It doesn't matter. Like, they're both representing a district that's predominantly white and progressive in DeKalb County. That's a knife fight. It sucks. The other race that I'm sort of watching is Sally Harrell. She's a state senator. She represents parts of North DeKalb. And her redistrict was drawn to be much more friendly to a non-white candidate on purpose. And she has drawn a non-white challenger. There's a challenge to that candidate's eligibility to run on tax issues. Sally Harrell's been in office for close to a decade at this point. And displacing an incumbent is difficult. And that's going to be one to watch to see whether or not demography is more important than how long you've represented a district and what your relationship is to that district.
Sally Harrell, and you're talking about the Sally Harrell David Lubin case?
Oh no, I'm not. I'm sorry.
I think you confused the Elena and Nadine case with Sally Harrell and David Lubin.
I have.
Let's back up. Let's rewind it. Okay.
So I want you to talk about like the David Lubin part.
Yeah. So David Lubin had a daughter who was in IDF, died. Israeli Defense Forces died. Sally Harrell took a vote that was controversial on the anti-Semitism bill. If I recall correctly, that had to do with freedom of speech concerns. And so now David Lubin is running against her. Do you have any thoughts about that specific race?
So one of the things at The Guardian that we've been tracking, and not just here in Georgia, but across the country, is the degree to which the Gaza war is going to affect politics, both at the national level and at the local level. There's been this broad protest asking voters to vote in none of the above in the presidential primaries. But I actually do think this plays out at a local level. I think that there's a question about whether or not support for the Gaza war strengthens or weakens a candidate who's running for public office here. There is a tremendous amount of public sentiment around support for Palestinians when they're watching like the sort of the death rate that they're looking at. You have to drill down into the specifics of that district to see whether or not in a Democratic primary, whether or not that challenge will prevail.
And then touching real quickly on the Nadine Thomas, Elena Parent. Elena Parent's been a state senator for a long time. Yep. Nadine Thomas was a state senator at one point. She left, but now she's challenging Elena in her radically redrawn district. which a lot of it goes through Clayton County right now. There is a hearing today. Nadine Thomas's eligibility is being challenged due to a tax debt. Assistant editor now, Zoe Seiler, was at the hearing today, and she's going to be covering that story for us as well. You got any thoughts on that real quickly?
First, my apologies to Elena for confusing her with Sally Errol. These challenges rarely work. Like, can work. This one might, but it's very rare to knock a candidate off the ballot, particularly over tax stuff, because people could just figure out a payment plan and they meet the legal criteria. Usually when somebody's being knocked off, it's because they've got a far more core eligibility problem. Like, they don't actually live in the district that they're running in. And I have seen those be successful.
Well, given that the people filing this challenge against Nadine Thomas probably know that, what's the advantage to them of doing that? Just visibility, bringing attention to the issue?
Some of it is just this moment where we're talking about it.
Where we're talking about it.
Because now everybody knows that Nadine Thomas has a $35,000 tax debt that's gone unpaid, and that might affect who's going to vote for her or not. Nadine Thomas is a former elected official. She served, I believe she served in the state Senate for a while. So one would assume she's got some, she understands politics and she understands how to win an election. They're viewing this as dirty pool. And I don't know if I believe that. Like, I think it's a fair question to raise.
So moving on to our last topic today, we're going to talk about Georgia is a swing state, believe it or not. I would have never believed that in a million years, but yeah, here we are. We're a swing state. It's a presidential election year. I've read some reports that Biden is definitely going to be campaigning here, hoping that Georgia will be a part of his coalition. Do you think that Georgia will vote for Biden again? If so, why or why not?
I'm getting out of the prognostication game on that. I think Georgia's too close to call. I think that they're going to treat it like it's too close to call. The one thing that concerns me is that there's a degree of apathy that I'm seeing right now that I didn't see in 2016. And in part it's because there's no Senate race. There's no U.S. Senate race that's driving local, a very local campaign.
You mean 2020, not 2016?
2016 and 2020.
Okay.
Both of them. Like, people were losing their minds in both years. We must win. Like, there's a massive voter drives, massive public interest. You've got to look around to find a Biden sign in Atlanta right now. Like, in DeKalb, like, there were massive rallies happening all the time. Campaign offices, I don't see that right now. And I say that for both Trump and Biden. Trump is coming to town. He's going to be holding a fundraiser, a high-dollar fundraiser in Atlanta in a few weeks. But there isn't a lot of noise. I think that will change. I think we are in the calm before the storm. The key question is, again, the Gaza question and voter perceptions around the economy. It is becoming much more expensive to live in Georgia than it was in 2020. Some people are going to react very negatively to that. On the other hand, unemployment is low. Housing, while expensive, people are actually own more houses than they used to. It's a toss-up. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, we're going to have to stick a pin in it right there and pick it up next time. George Chidi, everybody. George, real quick, can you tell people how they can follow you, your Twitter, your Substack? What are the ways they can keep up with you and the good work that you're doing?
My Twitter account, and Twitter is evil, is Neon Flag. But you can find me on Substack at the Atlanta Objective.
Great subscription there if you want to follow some of the best journalism going on in Georgia. George Chidi, thank you so much for joining us. This is the Decatur Dish Show. We tape every Tuesday at 12:30 here on ANF Plus. If you want to view this show, view prior episodes of this show, download the Atlanta News First Plus app. It's free. It's a great way to support us and support our media partners at Atlanta News First. You can find all the stuff that we're doing at Decaturish over at Decaturish.com. That's our main URL. If you want to keep up with campaign stuff, we're doing a lot of campaign elections coverage this year. Go to Decaturish DeKalbVotes.com. That's our URL for campaign coverage. LocallySourcedNews.com is where you can sign up for our email list. And SupportYourLocalNews.com is where you can go to become a paying supporter of Decaturish. We appreciate all the support that we get. We hope that you will tune in next week at 12:30 on ANF Plus. Goodbye, everybody.